I believe I'm live. We shall see. Super glad to be launching my first book. This is so just wow. I just wanted to share a little bit about why I wrote the book and a little bit about just the genesis of how I got to this point. And really it started with a conversation with my mom. I was driving home and she said that in the midst of a crisis that there can be chaos. And I mentioned to her that there can also be clarity in the midst of a crisis. There can also be some clarity. And right then, the idea for the book was birthed from there. And just, I had some other milestones set where I was like, okay, I'm going to get it done December 2020. And then our son's daycare closed for a little bit, and no, he didn't close. We kept him home for a period of time. And then there were all these other things that kind of came along and popped up. Feel free to ask me any questions. This dashboard is so different. I am going to have to play around with Facebook Lives a little bit more, but but I did want to just share a little bit since Amazon doesn't have a preview available. Wanted to be able to give a little preview and thank everyone that's already purchased a copy. Thank them for that. Orders that have been placed through my website have already went out, and orders that are on Amazon, those are typically being received within like a day. And I can't tell who's viewing, but hello, thank you for joining. With the book, it's broken down into two parts, where the first part is all about survival, because in the midst of crisis, our first goal is to just get through it. And with all that's going on, I really thought this was a good time to launch this because a lot of people are starting to get ready to get back into going into the office if they're not already back in their office full time. Kids are going back to school. And I've said it and I really mean it, that if the parents are okay, that the kids will be okay. When you order it directly from me, you end up getting you get a little surprise. So I will sign it. And then I also have a customizable bookmark that you're able to color. But it's really a resource. And it starts out with finding peace in the storm. So in the midst of crisis, in the midst of everything that's going on, the goal is to anchor yourself and get some peace. And to not get distracted by the storm. And these are all tips and tools that I actually used. So right in March of 2020, I walked away from my full-time position. I was an intensive school-based counselor director. I loved my job, and I had said that I would never leave the company that I worked for. Any of my former staff know that I always made those statements, and you have to be careful what you tell God you won't do. Anytime I've said I won't do something, that typically is the thing that ends up happening. But launching my own business has given so much peace. It's given so much. And so then we go into healing old wounds, that in the midst of a crisis, that old wounds can kind of pop up and we might need to heal some things. So I might have worked on this thing in the past, but now this is kind of bringing a lot of old stuff back up. We need to talk about getting through uncertainty. So a big step in moving forward is that we have to accept that we don't know what's coming. So anxiety wants certainty and control. That comes from the work of Dr. Reed Wilson and Dr. Lynn Lyons, and their work on anxiety changed my clinical practice. It changed my own practice. So I have a little anxiety. Anxiety isn't good or bad. No emotion is good or bad. A little bit of anxiety helps you plan and prepare. Too much anxiety cripples you so that you can't do things. And so preparing for uncertainty, accepting that it's gonna come. turning pain into purpose. So pain without purpose, that ends up feeling like torture. And if we can find some if we can find some purpose in the midst of the pain, and that's really a lot of what I applied within my own life within the past year, was really looking for some purpose, looking for some meaning and some value. And being able to do that can often help along the way. Avoiding self-sabotage. So there's a whole chapter, and the hilarious thing, so I tried to include a little bit of my own journey within different chapters. And so for the self-sabotage chapter, so I almost avoided that chapter. So it came time to finish that one, and I was looking like, is there anything else I can do? Like, I started avoiding the self-sabotage chapter, and we talk about imposter syndrome, that in the midst of crisis, our own issues, we can sometimes get in our own way. We can limit our own success. We can limit ourselves because of our own stuff. And so being able to address some of that can be really helpful. In every single chapter, at the end of every chapter, there is a resource. There are resources, additional books, where it's like, okay, I really need to look more into this imposter syndrome. I really need to look more into healing some of these old wounds. There are additional books that you can take a look at. I will be honest, and I have not read, so I'm about to start reading Oprah's What Happened to You. Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry combined to do a phenomenal book. I have heard amazing things about it. As I was writing my book, I didn't want to read it and then like have my own imposter syndrome of because I'm sure it's going to be absolutely amazing. I really wanted to put some things together that could help people as we enter the next phases of getting back to some kind of normal, and just getting through things that will come up down the way. And then the last part of part one, survival, is helpers need help too. I have a YouTube video on that as well. And with helpers need help too, that was something that I had mentioned before, but in the midst of COVID, in the midst of 2020, really asking for help, being vulnerability was something that really helped. And as a wife, as a mom, the thing that I like to help people with is that other people aren't going to automatically know what you want or need. You often have to tell them. You often have to say, hey, this is what I need some help with. This is what I need from you. That our partner, that other people in our lives, especially not our children. I work with a lot of people that want their kids to like see the dishes and then like preemptively go and wash the dishes. Like now, if you have a kid that does that, phenomenal, please pat them on the back. But for most kids, the dishes mean more to the parents than they do to the actual child. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That, okay, I might have to remind you, like, okay, I'm gonna have to set up some routine and just a little bit of structure, that in the midst of crisis, in the midst of uncertainty, that developing some type of routine can really be helpful. Then we go into part two, because it's about surviving and then thriving. And we talk a lot about post-traumatic stress, but we don't talk a lot about resilience and post-traumatic growth. That in the midst of crisis, in the midst of things that are going wrong, some people find a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of purpose, a deeper connection with others. Something that I love is within our family, we have connected more, and we have been doing more Zoom. So we Zoom every single Saturday. And I'm gonna have to plug in my computer, but I'm gonna try to talk as I continue to plug in. If you have questions for me, you can feel free to ask. And if not, it's just super cool to get to come on and say hello. And my son is loving getting to watch YouTube for a little bit. Screen time in the midst of crisis, just a little bit of extra screen time can help. But so chapter 7 goes into strategies to build resilience and thrive. There are some specific things. So people have studied resilience, and we know that there are specific things that we can do to help build resilience in people. And I dedicated a whole chapter to parents, but there's some parenting tips, especially related to adoption. There's also a special note in the book for veterans. There are some special populations that I work with, and that I've really seen an increase in certain people accessing services during this time. And so I wanted to give a special note to those people. Holistic wellness. So there are 6 dimensions of wellness. Some people talk about 7. They add environmental wellness to that, your spiritual wellness, your mental or emotional wellness, your intellectual wellness, your occupational wellness, and I'm going to forget some physical wellness, all of those things. And with my mom during our podcast, Legacy Moments, we talk about being able to have intentional imbalance. Like, all those things will never be perfectly balanced. There will always be something that's a little bit out of whack, but being able, so my physical wellness being off is going to impact my emotional wellness, which can impact, and so all of these things can be connected. And taking an assessment of when I'm stressed, what do I go to? Do I go to food? Do I go to, what is it that I tend to go to that might not be healthy and might help me get through that time, but maybe it's not healthy? And let's intentionally practice things that can help feed those parts of us in a positive way. Coping with grief and loss, whole chapter on just coping with grief and loss. Specifically noting that we often don't know what to say to people in the midst when people are hurting, that we sometimes have a little toxic positivity. My mom and I talked about that during a podcast episode, that sometimes we try to, because we're not comfortable sitting with somebody else's pain, we say things that can be very invalidating. So, as soon as I sit down with somebody that's had a loss, if I say, well, they're in a better place, that person might not be ready to hear that. Sometimes what that person might need to hear is, I have no idea what you're feeling, or just sitting in silence. That can be extremely powerful when somebody is in the midst of their pain, or even just being able to say, like, hey, are you needing to laugh or are you needing to cry? I'm here for you either way. And just letting people know that you sit with them and you support them no matter what they're going through. I thought that was really important. We talk about forgiveness. And so a big thing is saying what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. I am on social media, and there are lots of videos about, forgiveness isn't required for healing. And often I feel like people are talking more about reconciliation than about forgiveness. And I do think that whoever goes through something, that forgiveness is a personal walk and a personal journey. It impacted me. So my own forgiveness journey was extremely helpful within my own life. And I also did my dissertation on forgiveness and aggressive children, and saw some of the positive things that can come out of walking with forgiveness. And so, Chapter 11 is raising resilient children. And I do get into positive parenting techniques and some other things that I think are really helpful in how do we look forward to this next generation and raise them in a way that helps put them in a better place than maybe we are, because they are much more emotionally aware. And I have a whole section within that chapter, I believe, on if your child is having issues at school, what are some of the, especially within the US, if your child is having issues at school, what are some of the resources that you have? If your child is having, issues, if you're noticing things, because often with kids, when kids have something going on in their life, you will see it in their behaviors. they're not going to come to you and say, I'm sad. They're not going to come to you and say, I'm anxious. You're going to see it. They're going to get an attitude. Their grades are going to start falling. They're going to see behaviors like, where did this behavior come from? And switching from asking why to asking, help me understand what's going on, and being able to talk about some of those things. I think that can be really helpful. And lastly, chapter 12 is just additional resources. I have a list of my favorite TikTok therapists, and some podcasts and just some other things at the end, explaining the process of if you would like to access therapy, what are some of the steps to do that. It is a very complicated process. There are lots of terms and things that can be very confusing. And so I just kind of break down in a way that can be really user friendly, how if somebody would like to talk to somebody, how do they go about that? And my big goal is just that people would take from it that they would be better prepared to cope and manage whatever comes. We're not able to know exactly what's going to happen, and but we can develop emotional intelligence. We can connect with, we can make sure that we're in a good place physically, spiritually, in all these different ways to kind of propel us forward. And so thank you all so much for watching. I'm super glad that I was able to just put this out there. And if you want a signed copy, that is through my website, mindyourlegacy.com. And if you want it, Amazon, there's an ebook on Amazon, and then Amazon will get it to you fast. The cover on Amazon, I might tweak it a little bit. The cover on Amazon, I ordered my own copies, which are taking, which I haven't seen yet, but I might tweak the cover over on Amazon. But thank you all so much for joining, and I hope y'all have a good day. Bye.